What's up, everybody? We have just been discussing the fact that there may be a correlation. There probably is. We just don't know it. I don't know. We got to do some more research about barometric pressure and the way humans act and the way deer act and probably a lot of things in nature and creation out there act. Erik and Mark apparently have been feeling rather sluggish this week. We've had what did you say it was? We've had a
stagnant low-pressure front hanging over us here in the upper Midwest.
Is this something you guys frequently check? I got to say, the last time I checked Barrow was...
Barrow, Alaska?
Never ago.
So, okay,
I check it daily during the fall.
Right. So here's how this came up. I've made overtime observations at work.
Yes.
Where maybe on a certain day you see like a group of people who generally they eat about noon. Now I'm not watching people all the time. These are general observations, but I'll see on a certain day, all of a sudden everybody's super hungry at 10 a.m. Mm-hmm. And actually, what I didn't do, Erik, though, was actually check the barometric trip.
Right.
But it's just something that kind of like occurred. It was just an observation.
There's different ebbs and flows of behavior.
Right. And then Sawyer and Erik and I were just talking. We're all super sluggish today. Nobody really has a valid reason why. Nobody was staying up late last night. Nobody had a super heavy meal 10 minutes ago. And yet we're all just a little bit slow on the draw, just sluggish.
Yep.
Tired. Erik, like you said, just let out the world's longest yawn.
Yeah, it was incredibly long. I've never seen anything like it. But let me ask you this. What's your guys' coffee schedule been like today? Because myself, I never drink coffee. We were discussing this. Brittany's also a person who never drinks coffee.
Yeah.
Neither does MC Ryan. So MC Ryan and Brittany, have you guys been feeling particularly sluggish today? Oh, okay. Brittany's
Look at
nodding in agreement. MC Ryan, how are you feeling today? He's feeling fine, he says. Well, okay, but that's MC Ryan. Let's be honest. The man, he...
well-oiled machine.
Likely might be a CIA...
I was going to say, man, computer,
some
I'm
kind of
still
NSA, government, special created robot.
You ever see that show, Small Wonder?
No.
That's a good show. Anyway, the daughter was a robot.
I've been watching a lot of Stranger Things lately. Ryan might be... Oh, my gosh, what if he's 12?
Oh, wow.
I haven't watched far enough into Stranger Things to know if they find it 12, but
stay
stay
tuned. Stay tuned.
Ryan.
I think you're in season 1 yet.
Maybe he's 13. I'm just starting 2.
Yeah.
On that note, speaking of Stranger Things and whitetail behavior with barometric pressure and fall, we're going to discuss hunting. You always know we got to get around to hunting or shooting at some point in these podcasts. But we had a message come in on Instagram, and this is from at the Buckshot. Shot with a 0, no spaces, no underscores, nothing. At the Buckshot. Let me see if you're listening right now. Buck Dudley on Instagram asked us, "Hey, I have a question for an episode. Have you ever covered the topic of transitioning from Western hunting to Midwestern hunting? Where do you start? Is the gear similar? Things like that." This is a phenomenal question, I think, and it was somewhat of a revelation to me when I read it, because I realized that a lot of what we speak to is the opposite transition.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
People who are on the eastern half of the Mississippi in this country venturing over into the western half of this country as split by the Mississippi River and hunting something on more of an aspirational, big, adventurous, kind of means, elk, mule deer, maybe even so much as Alaska, moose and caribou, or just doing something big and grandiose like that. And that's what gets talked about a ton. But the Midwestern hunting side of things, not as much. And especially the transition, if you are somebody more used to that Western hunting lifestyle, over to the Midwest or the East Coast, that kind of hunting. And I think that in many ways, because the conversation is always revolving around, I would say, people out in the West hunting Western stuff, or people going over to get into Western huntings, do their first Western hunt, big adventurous hunt, which is a very worthwhile topic to discuss. But because that's talked about far more, I think people think that hunting east of the Mississippi just must be easy.
Yep.
You must just throw on your overalls and a couple of muck boots, grab your old 30-06 and just pick any old tree in the woods, sit in it, and then the deer just come and blouch, 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 shoot as many as you can see and head back and have a fish fry and eat some venison. I don't know.
No, I think you're right, Jim. I think there are some misconceptions there as far as like, what goes into a whitetail hunt, the difficulty, the strategy, the equipment, which I think we're going to get into all these topics here pretty soon. And I think, another thing that you talk about, from west going east, I think no matter where you're at, I think you're curious about other places as a hunter. At least I know I am, right? Mm-hmm. I think there can be a little bit of a grass is greener element going on there. So, where if you live in the Midwest, you're looking, I want to do something over here that's new, and, maybe vice versa. And one thing that popped in my head while we're sitting here would be like a job transfer. Maybe you're from Montana, but the right job came up, or maybe you got relocated and bam, you're plunked into the Midwest. You still want to hunt.
Right.
Yeah,
Gotta
totally.
figure it out.
So that's what we're going to chat about here a little bit. We have Erik with us. Jimmy speaking here. Erik is joining us. He is Midwest whitetail hunter extraordinaire.
Yes.
We have Mark, who himself has done a little bit of a west to Midwest transfer.
Mm-hmm.
You've made your way over in steps because you started out in Washington State, then you moved to Nebraska, and now you're in the homeland of Wisconsin.
Yes, sir.
The Dairyland.
So we're going to draw on you, and also the fact that you've gone on Western hunts from Alaska to Utah to the Southwest to Montana, the Dakotas. You've gone all over.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to draw on some of your experience as well to discuss some of these tactics that maybe people are used to employing, gear that they're used to employing, and all that other stuff out west that might be the same or might come around to bite you in the butt if you try to use it the same way or do it the same way in the Midwest. Where does one start though? What is one somebody who's out there out west and they're going to be coming over, like you said, maybe job, maybe just on a whim, maybe a family member brought them over to the Midwest. Where do they got to start to even hunting around here? I mean, is it like I guess I'm even thinking as far as what to hunt, when to hunt it, where are you getting the tags from, all that stuff.
You mind if I field this one, Erik?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'll use when I moved to Wisconsin in particular, right? Because, we had some pretty solid public land out in Nebraska, but when I moved to Wisconsin, my perception was absolutely every piece of huntable land or huntable land worthwhile was locked up in private. And I was either going to have to know somebody, family, get a lease, use connections, knock on a lot of doors, if I was going to get a place to hunt. And so that's kind of what I focused on the first couple of years. And I hunted a little bit of public along with that. But, I'll tell you, and I think I've even mentioned this before, what really opened my eyes to knowing that wasn't necessarily the case. I think, don't get me wrong, the land out here, I'm going to backtrack. The land out here is very compartmentalized. There is a lot of private land ownership. I think there's other states that are similar to Wisconsin where...
You're talking about the heartland where like a gigantic percentage of our nation's like corn and food and dairy products all come out of. So
and where a lot of
farms.
And where a lot of people live too.
Ton of people as well, yeah.
Yep. So, you're looking at a lot of pieces of land. You got 12s, 40s, 100 acres. 300 acres is probably a pretty darn big chunk of private land.
Yeah.
And so anyway, like I said, that was a little bit of a misconception. Once I got Onyx, that actually really opened my eyes into being able to scout from home and then kind of go verify. I know you do a lot of that too, Erik. Maybe you'd probably speak to this, even better than I can. But where I'm going, you got to find a place. You got to have a place to hunt.
Yeah.
So whether it's public or private, you got to have the place. Sometimes easier said than done out here, but for sure, very doable with a little bit of research.
Even growing up in Wisconsin my whole life, I remember thinking to myself the same thing that you thought. I remember hearing people talk about hunting public land, I was like, yeah, that's a Western thing. Not going to happen here. Right. And then I got Onyx, and I, started looking around. You start just looking for those blue or green or yellow patches. Yep. And I realized they're small, and they're, sporadically placed a lot of times. They don't always connect up nicely, or you don't always get... I remember the first time I saw that... is it the Wyoming checkerboard, or is it the... I remember the first time I saw that, I was like, whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's its own issue.
Right. But some of the other, as you go out there, you see these gigantic expanses. But around here, you'll find, here's a 100-acre piece here. And
Yeah.
then just southwest 20 miles is another 100-acre piece. And then over here, there's a 60-acre spot. And you can start connecting them. But even still, there's also some relatively bigger spots, too. I remember just being like, I'm actually surrounded by public spots.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I'd say this, just because it's small doesn't mean it's not a good spot. And just because it's big doesn't mean that it's a great spot.
Right.
And I'll go back to another misconception when I got here was that, there's some public, but it's probably junk. Maybe I'm not going to find deer on it. It's going to be, super pounded, tons of pressure, people everywhere, which not entirely untrue, particularly at certain times.
And not entirely a bad thing.
Especially in some spots, too. Certain spots definitely get hammered more than others.
Yep.
So I'd start with finding a place.
So doing a lot of scouting as far as locations and stuff like that. Oh, shoot, where do we go? I mean, next up, you got to think, so what are people hunting in the Midwest a lot? And Midwest, and we'll lump in East Coast. I got to admit, I don't know a whole lot about the East Coast, but I usually just assume it's very similar in some ways. Until you get up to the Northeast, probably, because then you're talking about moose again. You're talking about mountains.
Yep.
That would be an interesting podcast in and of itself to get somebody from
Yeah.
one of the Hampshires or something like that.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I got a guy.
You got a guy.
Yep.
All right. Well, anyway.
I'm excited because that's like, I mean, I think Wisconsin's probably about as far east as I've gotten, actually.
Yeah. So what are people hunting? You know, is the only thing to hunt around here whitetail deer?
I mean, from a big game perspective,
It's definitely the most sought after.
yeah.
Yeah.
Deer and turkey. And I think the majority, I mean, the majority of the listeners that are, listening to this right now probably aren't going to make a trip out to the Midwest to go after pheasants. I mean, or...
That's fair. Again, we're
Right.
thinking, though, maybe somebody literally got transplanted.
Yeah. So I would say, like, deer and turkey are going to be the most sought after. I mean, there's definitely, like, other small game and stuff like that. But, I think the most of the stuff that we were kind of looking at is... as far as like comparing, is going to be deer based,
Right.
whitetail based.
Yeah.
And there's going to be, exceptions to that. Like, there's opportunities for elk in Kentucky, but,
Yep.
very limited. I mean, by and large, within reach of a person who either, like you said, has moved here or
Yep.
transplant,
There's some
or they
opportunities for elk in Wisconsin now, too.
Yep. And bear.
even more limited.
Yep.
Yeah. But
But-
yeah, in very limited numbers. Okay. So we're mostly talking
We're talking
Whitetails.
whitetails.
about
Yeah.
whitetails here. Yeah.
And
Though
it-
small
it's-
game hunting can be quite fun.
Right. And I think it's also worth noting, too, that like a lot of these guys that might be living out west, and I mean, Erik Chesser, we were just talking to him. This is a guy that lives out west, huge big game hunter out there. His bucket list thing for this fall is he wants to shoot a whitetail out of a tree stand in the Midwest.
Right.
So I think it's worth noting, too, that a lot of people who might, just like us, we live in the Midwest, and for a lot of, my friends that are into hunting, they're dreaming of like going out west chasing elk or something like that. Where I think a lot of people out west, the grass is always greener. You already mentioned that. People might want to, oh man, I've never shot a whitetail. I'd really like to go to the Midwest because the Midwest is the whitetail belt of the United States. So they kind of put a big radar on Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, and they head east to, fulfill that.
So, all right. I don't know if are we moving at a good pace, or should we get right into like tactics and gear and stuff, or what else should be mentioned before you find yourself here? Because I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of an out of towner who shows up and they just kind of wondering like, how do I even like where am I going?
Well,
we addressed where do you go. Onyx is going to be a huge help to you in just scouting out spots, driving around.
That's going to be a huge help. And, this is something that Erik and I talk about a fair amount, is you're probably going to, if you've paid attention to any mainstream whitetail media, you're probably going to have to overcome some misconceptions you've built up over time as to what's realistic when you're looking at chasing whitetail deer. Because I'd say oftentimes, particularly if you're not going to a place that's, managed heavily, or you don't have, a family member that's doing that sort of thing, that's probably not a realistic portrayal of what you're going to encounter.
Yep.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll see a lot of guys out there, like your average whitetail hunt that gets portrayed in the mainstream media is someone who hunts very conservatively. You might hear that person talk about, I don't go into this spot because I don't want to spook these deer. Mm-hmm. They might be walking to a pre-hung stand. They bring in a little fanny pack or something really small that maybe has a knife, a pair of rattling antlers, and a grunt call in it, and minimal gear. Walk into the stand fully dressed, and then they plop themselves down ready to go.
Stands pre-hung.
Exactly. When in reality, like if you're talking about a DIY type adventure where you're coming out here, let's just assume someone's coming out to the Midwest, they're chasing whitetails, and they're predominantly hunting public land or on permission type stuff. They're not going to have a stand already hung, so you got to think about, bringing that stand in, finding the place to hang it, and all the stuff which we're going to get into that factors into that system. Because I think when you really start peeling back the layers there's a really dialed system on the inside that is going to correlate directly to your success and, feasibility to do those things.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know. What do you think? Should we dive right into that?
I think so. I think that's a really good place to start.
I was actually just listening to a podcast similar to kind of what we're talking about right now by Tony Peterson. He has like the Hunt for Real podcast, and he does some really cool stuff where it's predominantly focused on DIY hunting. And he summed up whitetail hunting, DIY whitetail hunting, as cautiously aggressive. And I think that's a great way to think about it. For example, we talked about the misconceptions there of walking into a spot that overlooks a food plot, has a stand or a box blind or something like that. That's not going to be the case for the people that are coming out here and doing that. So, we've heard a lot of misconceptions about like, oh, whitetail hunting, you just walk in there, you sit down, and you're good to go.
Yep.
Not necessarily going to be the case. I mean, it's definitely a more stationary hunt than, let's say, you're throwing camp on your back and going after elk in the backcountry, but I would argue that the stationary part of whitetail hunting is only the icing that goes on top of the cake. And that's, there's a ton of stuff that goes into that on the front end, like walking in, finding the spot, finding where to hunt, reading the sign. You're moving and bringing yourself into this spot, and then you got to take a map that might be several hundred acres and find a spot to sit.
Are you doing a lot of you're explaining walking in, finding the spot, finding where you're going to hang your stand. The actual option or idea or action of hanging the stand itself, or maybe you're bringing out a saddle, so maybe you can just get up in a saddle or something like that. Are you doing that all the same day of the actual hunt, or is that all happening? Because to me, what it seems like, and I don't want to already start summing it up before we've even really gotten into the meat of it, but it seems like a lot. It's always a chess match, right? A game of strategy, a game of different, something that doesn't want to be killed, moving around, really trying to avoid being killed. Mm-hmm. And then you are something out there that is, and I know, again, it's a visceral term, but you're out there trying to kill it. Let's just admit that, right? For good intentions, good reasons, all that stuff, but you're out there trying to kill it. So it's two things that want opposite, like things to happen.
Right.
You definitely want a different outcome.
Yes.
Right. And so I feel like a lot of that chess match and the strategy in these places happens all on the front end, or almost all on the front end.
Mm-hmm. I look at it as like there's two chess matches going on almost like back to back. You have this entire hunt that goes into where you're going to start hunting. Yeah. So you've got your aerial scouting, your boots on the ground.
Aerial via maps and stuff.
Aerial via maps. Your boots on the ground stuff that maybe you've done prior to the season.
Yep.
And then, your woodsmanship going into the hunt, right?
Yep.
As far as reading sign, when you get there, sometimes you don't have a ton of luxury if you're going in the dark in the morning.
Yeah.
But there's just so much that goes into it. The time of the year, right? That's going to dictate where you might set up. I mean, we talk to the THP guys a lot, and people, they talk about the October lull, right? And it's like, well, the deer aren't necessarily unkillable. You just got to get a lot tighter. So then it's just, so the time of year comes into a play.
Yeah. And another thing with that is you mentioned kind of like the October lull, if you want to take it a step further and think about like when to hunt, obviously the rut falls in the early part of November. That's when deer are the most active. But, like you just mentioned, the October lull, a lot of people, and I do think there is, like, deer definitely are not as active in October as they are during the rut. But you take an 80-degree crappy day in October, in the middle of October, I guarantee that public land parking lot's going to be empty.
I know.
And you're going to have that to yourself. So that's why a lot of guys look at those less than desirable days and they think like, this is the time I'm going to catch up on my honey-do list, before the rut. Which is, there's definitely something to be said for that if you do have a lot of stuff to do. But
if the option is to either or,
yeah,
or it's I either do this or I do that,
yeah,
then you might choose the one where you have
right.
potentially better shot. But if it's, I could go this and then also later.
Definitely then don't overlook it, because those are the days where you're going to be able to get out there and you'll have those spots all to yourself. You'll be able to try different techniques. Let's say you wanted to glass a spot and deploy some of these Western tactics, like sitting up on a hill and trying to watch deer come out of a CRP field and maybe make a move on them and cut them off. Those are the times, I think, where you can start trying some of those more unconventional whitetail tactics.
Well, I think, unconventional / maybe, I guess right, wrong, or otherwise, but particularly if you're coming from out of state, you've got a limited amount of time, but hopefully you've done a lot of pre-scouting where you have a lot of spots picked out that you can explore. You can be aggressive. And Eric, you might know, or I should say you would know better than I, but like, let's say you were hunting October. We'll say maybe the third week of October, not even the last week of October, where those deer are less, they're not on their feet, as much as they would be during the rut, I should say. Is that a time where, I'm trying to put this, like if you were going to focus on getting into where a deer was bedded, right, you're going to have to get pretty tight to where that deer is bedded. But does that also help you narrow down where that deer might be? Like, are you eliminating a lot of places where you might actually go hunt during the rut?
Yeah, definitely. Because during the rut, you can definitely bump into random movement. But during October and September, you're trying to get to those really specific core areas where deer is going to be bedded. And a lot of that is just like, you look at them, if you're looking at this from a map perspective, you find a spot that, okay, this looks like it has some terrain, some stuff where it could work for a deer to be there. And you're taking a lot, like 90% of that map and throwing it away, and you're focusing on those super small core areas. So yeah, I definitely think that you're kind of throwing away, real estate in order to get to a very small specific chunk, because that's the area where you suspect deer to be.
What do those spots look like to you when you're looking at it on a map where you think, there could be, or there's more likely to be, or this seems like a good spot if I were a deer to be their beds? Because I hear a lot of times the hunting public, that's also, when Mark says THB, it's the hunting public who does a lot of Midwestern hunting stuff. You hear them talking about finding beds all the time.
Yeah.
I hear people talking about finding beds a lot.
Yeah.
When they're especially talking about whitetail in the Midwest area.
Yeah.
What are those characteristics and qualities about aerial scouting and then boots on the ground scouting that you're looking at to find those kind of spots?
So I think it varies on the terrain, and I think we'll go over hill country and we'll go over flat farm country, because I think those are the most common. So hill country, like what I would be looking for is a spot where a deer can have some elevation. It can be bedded on the upper third of a ridge, have a prevailing wind. In the Midwest, that would be a northwesterly wind blowing over the top of it.
Does that mean, it's a dumb question, does that mean it's coming from the northwest?
Yep. Okay. Coming out of the northwest, going southeast. So that deer, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people kind of have different ideas here, but I think a mature buck wants to bed with its back into the wind, so the wind is coming up over it, like cooking over that ridge, and then it can smell anything that would be approaching upwind of it. And then because it's on a hill, it's got a big vantage point where it can look down. So it's got almost 360 degrees of protection there.
Its nose is the eyes in the back of its head, and its eyes are the eyes in the front of its head.
And then I think if you reverse that to like flat farm country, I'm thinking like really, areas where it's lots of fields, maybe a couple fence rows. You're going to look at spots where maybe there's a pond and just a real subtle change in habitat, like a fence row. And it's really the same thing. Let's say it's bedded up. It's a pond that's on the backside of a field surrounded by tall grass. that deer would watch. I think deer watch access trails where it finds that people frequent or any other predators. So I think they usually bed so they can look at that because they know where those visually are, so they can watch them. And then I think they set themselves up in a way where they can smell any kind of threat from the upwind side.
Yep. I've found a couple buck beds where I literally am like, I think this deer is unkillable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's why that bed is there. I'm talking like a single bed, dished out, used probably over years.
Yeah.
And like I'm looking like, and just the way the public abuts the private, and how you'd have to get you. It's why they're there.
Yeah, definitely.
It's unkillable deer.
Yeah. What about, let's throw river bottoms in there, Eric.
Yeah. So that's another good one because you have, when you look at a river on a map, no river is just straight as an arrow. You know, it bends and turns and usually has little tributaries and like oxbows and stuff. I don't know. I'd be curious what your thoughts are there, but I think, you know, if you look at those oxbows, that's where a lot of deer are going to bed. And then part of the reasoning for that is because they can pretty much rule out anything just popping up over a creek bank. You know, like it's not like every person is accessing from the river, which we'll get into that because I think that's a great way. We're actually going to do that here in a few months. And I think...
Stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned. A little tease. But hunting from, like, using water to access stuff, I think is a great way to do that. But, you know, if we're talking about how deer bed in those areas, I think they do tend to stay towards those oxbows because they can rule out, you know, air quotes, something coming from the river, keep their back to that, and then watch out into a flat river. River bottoms are flat. You know, you could put a level on it and it would be perfectly plumb. And so they can see for forever in most cases.
Yep.
So they'll bed with water to their back looking out into the flat river bottom.
I think that makes sense because every time I've hunted a river bottom where actually I generally access from the non-water side, by and large, the deer are always coming from closer to the river.
Yeah, yep.
One thing I've also noticed actually in rivers, and this doesn't really go into bedding, it's more of, it does go into bedding. The river bottoms that at least I've hunted have been relatively flat. And like I said, there's people that know a lot more about this than I do. But where there are maybe slight terrain features, where maybe there's actually almost like, I mean, and I'm talking like maybe 3 feet, but it's almost like a ridge, just like a contour line that runs throughout. There's like a beaten trail just on that little contour line.
It could be as much as a couple downed trees that were uprooted in a windstorm. And then there could be a trail right on the backside of those because they're using just that little subtle change in visual barrier or elevation, like you said, even
very
if it
much
is.
edge creatures.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
I can jive with that though. I always like clean edges, and I just like
Yeah.
You know.
So there's my river bottom tip. Actually, although there might be not very many contour lines,
If you find one.
if you find some, there's likely to be some sort of something there.
Yep.
When you find a bed, so I hear people talk about that they stumbled upon a bed. What do you do at that point? Like you said, oh, I walked up and here's a buck bed. And that's where I hear a lot of people's stories trail off. Because it's like, oh, look, I found this bed. I don't know at that point then what they're doing about it. Once you find the bed and once you've gotten in it or you've stood around it, is the deer ever going to come back to that bed because now it smells like you? Is it still going to come back? It doesn't really care that it smells like you. And now are you setting up in a spot that's near it? How do you pick the spot that you're setting up that's near it, if so? Or are you going to leave it alone? I don't know. What's going on?
I mean, I'd say there's no question while you're hunting you're going to find beds. Like if you're moving through different spots, you're going to find deer beds. Hopefully, if you're hunting a bedding area, it's going to be something that you either have, I guess, pre-scouted on a map, and you're like just using your hunter knowledge. You're like, good intuition. You're like, yeah, there's gonna be deer bedding there. And I know you do a lot of this, Erik, but you found those places well before the season started.
Yeah. Yep. So like last year, I think a really good example of this is last year I had an Illinois tag, and I went down there the weekend before Illinois opened up. It was the only chance I had to scout the property. It was a less than 1,000-acre piece. Went in there, and I got maybe about like a couple hundred yards from where I parked a vehicle, and I was walking into a wide open CRP field. Wanted to get on the back side of that. I'm burning really quick through this, and all of a sudden I see tines in the CRP, and there's a buck bedded right there. That buck, so I was definitely watching me, saw me come in, got to like 30 yards. If I would have had a bow, if the season would have been open, could have probably killed that deer. He blew out of there like just totally 100% saw me, smelled me, knew I was a threat, those three things, and he was gone. I went over to that bed, I marked it on a map immediately, and then based on that, I thought, okay, that deer saw me in this bed. It saw me in that bed because it was watching an access trail that I obviously used. So now you got to get...
Wait, did the deer see you? When you walked up and you saw the deer, was it in its bed or was it... Okay.
It was laying down in its bed.
Gotcha.
I have video stuff of this that we can post. So it saw me, got out of there, and now right away, like, okay, that's a spot where a buck is. You got to figure out how to hunt it, but you can't come in the access trail. So that's where you got to get creative. In this place specifically, there is a ditch, a really big ditch behind this area where the buck was bedded that you could have taken to access it. That would have turned it into about a mile walk in, which if you take the access trail, it's like a quarter of a mile. So it turns it way more into like a hassle for you. So I think once you find those beds, you start thinking big picture. How can I get to this spot where the deer obviously is looking this way with this wind that I'm suspecting, or like in that time that when you blow a deer out of an area right away, that's a good tip. Think about, okay, the deer is looking this way and the wind was doing this, because that way you now confirm the conditions where that deer wants to be in that location. So I had that obviously because I saw the deer in the bed.
And you usually assume the deer is going to go back to the spot even though it saw a threat at that spot?
Because it worked. It was a good thing that like that buck being there bedded and spooking, even though he got spooked, like he had a threat come in, he lived to see another day. So his bedding location theoretically worked.
Oh, he confirmed in his head, I'm in the right spot because I didn't die today.
Exactly.
He knows to be cautious.
Yep. Exactly. So he's probably not going to go gallivanting right back in there, but that's still an ace in his back pocket. He knows he can effectively lay in that location, watch this place, and escape out the back door. You know, it's like if you're think about like the Wild West. Yeah, or Al Capone. Like I think about Wild West, like my wife and I were in South Dakota at some of the places where all those like Old West gunfights would take place. A dude can be sitting there playing cards at a whiskey table, watch the main entrance to the saloon, and get out the back door before whoever's after him even lays eyes on him.
Noted. All right. Now I'm following. That's the part that I was always trying to figure out. I was like, well, if you find the buck bed, so what? I felt like they would just move, but no, that makes sense.
Well, and that's a good thing to remember, too, like, because I know I've been there in the past where you jump a buck up and you're like, it's over. I blew it. He's gone. I've ruined everything. I'm a horrible person. I'm not that good looking. But
in reality, it just started.
In reality, it just started, and you've got a big piece of knowledge to use to your advantage the next time. And I'm not going to claim this one at all. And actually, I've never even successfully done it. But you hear Infault talk about that bump and dump strategy, or the THP guys, hunting public guys, they talk about it too, where they jump a buck. If they jump a buck, they'll set up in that spot and occasionally kill that deer, like even that night.
Right?
Are you saying they set up in the spot where they bumped it, or they'll move to a
They'll probably move maybe 40 yards downwind, like ever so slightly, because they're working under the assumption that buck, it worked, the bed worked. They're going to come back to that. So, but that buck isn't going to just walk in looking around. It's going to walk in downwind. So they might set up 40 yards downwind of where they just bumped that deer. And actually, like in 2017, Aaron and Zach had a hunt that we can post a link to in Missouri where literally a deer did exactly that. They bumped it on a river bottom, made a quick switch, and that deer came right back like several hours later, like huge buck.
You know, I should say, and I may,
which is the part that really matters.
Yes.
Let's be honest.
The hugeness.
Thanks, Erik.
Yes.
Thanks, Erik.
I should, and I may have even brought this up on another podcast, but it's really only one time actually. I guess I have experienced seeing that happen, and it was in a Nebraska river bottom. My buddy and I, we bumped this really nice buck, and actually just sat down in that spot. And that evening, that same buck came back, and I had him at last light. It was like a 60-yard frontal, and I was just like not super confident in the shot, so I didn't take it.
Yeah.
But it was cool to see that play out, though.
Right. And I'm curious too. Like, did he come back in downwind of where he was, of where you guys bumped him?
That was a while ago.
Okay.
It was you know what? I'd say that he came back from the way he left.
Oh, okay.
It was almost like on the same trail.
Oh, yeah, it is interesting, huh?
Cool. So that's beds. You
Yes.
know, I think that's a great way to find deer and then start like hunting them effectively. I think that's the most effective way to do like a DIY style hunt. You know, like you'll hear a lot about, hunt over the food source. I don't know about that on
Is that
a
where
DIY
everybody starts
hunt.
talking about, like, just find the farmland?
Yeah, find the farmland, find the acorns, find the, cut cornfield or standing beans. That's where also you're going to run into a million other people, Yeah. And the deer flat out, and in my experience, aren't going to be walking around in broad daylight.
What you've described thus far sounds a lot like it's on the ground.
Yeah.
So you're saying you're walking around, and then you bump a deer, and then you set up. Where does the tree stand part come into play?
So,
Like, how do tree stands play? It's like the number one thing you hear about all the time is everybody talking about being in a tree stand.
Yep. And the reason that is, I think, in my opinion, is because that's usually where it goes down. That's where you end up, killing a deer from.
So if you bump a deer, when you say you're setting up, are you then putting up a tree stand near where you bumped that deer, or 40 yards downwind or whatever? Or are you still on the ground, or?
It depends, I would say. I know the hunting public guys, those guys are doing a lot of ground hunting because they're hunting a lot of marshland where they have a lot of like tall grass that they can use a ghillie suit. We don't have a ton of that in hill country. We don't have a lot of like marsh grass where you can nestle into. So in that situation, it would be a tree stand.
Okay.
But a lot of times you'll have these locations in mind. And then you'll get in there, whether that's during the daytime for an afternoon hunt or you're going in the pitch black, and then you're hanging your stand, which is a big safety thing to keep in mind for people that haven't done it before. And, I think figuring out what kind of system you want to use to get up into an elevated position is another thing for people to keep in mind, because there's just so many different options out there. And like you hear the term, hunt out of a tree stand, anyone can just go on their local retailer website, type in tree stand, and buy the first thing they see, but it might not be the best setup for like doing what's called like a hanging hunt.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways to be up in a tree.
Yes.
There's a lot of ways, and you're going to want to pick a system that is, as lightweight as you can get it, and, kind of purpose built for mobile hunting.
Yeah. Unless you have the chance at private where you're pre-hanging something that's going to be there forever.
Yep.
And I'll throw this out there, and for a person who maybe hasn't been in a tree stand before, like before I moved to Nebraska, I'd never been in a tree stand in my life. And one thing that I noticed, at least a lot of the places that I've hunted whitetails, is it can be like pretty brushy. You got a lot of briars or trees or brush or this, that, the other. If you were to be and I'm not saying, because a lot of people are hunting from the ground very successfully. In fact, I think that's something we're going to be talking about here on a later podcast.
Yep.
But man, when you get into that tree, your shooting opportunities open up, and it's almost like just like a glassing knob, right? Let's say you're out west and you're on a glassing knob. You're going to be able to see deer from further away too. Either know that they passed by, be ready if they're going to come by. You can just see so much better from that elevated position.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you're almost you can shoot down into little pockets. Of pockets.
That's what it usually looks like too. If you ever watch a video of
Right.
somebody doing it, you can kind of see these pockets below them.
Yeah, and I think part of the biggest thing when you're talking about mobile tree stand hunting that you got to think about is the act of actually hanging the tree stand. Literally, the most important thing, I think, is your safety system that you're using. You're going to want to use like some kind of full body safety harness, but then the part that is even more important than that is to bring a lineman's belt. That's what goes from one hip around the tree, connects to your other hip. That way, even if you can literally hang the tree using, both hands, your hands free, or you don't have one arm on the tree and you're trying to work your rat's trap, that's not going to happen.
Tried it.
Yeah. It's not good.
Eric, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how high?
Lots of swearing.
How high up are you usually too trying to do that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you're between 15 and 20 feet up trying to work ratchet straps. So if you're doing that by just hanging onto a tree, that's a huge safety concern. So using that lineman's belt is going to allow you to stay connected, work hands-free, work quieter, more efficiently, and you'll be able to hang that stand. And, I mean, if it takes you, let's say it takes you a half hour to hang a stand, which is not good with, one hand on a tree, it might take you 5 minutes to do that, when you have your hands free and you're using a lineman's belt.
And there's other options too. You can use a climbing stand.
Yeah.
There's other systems out there.
Definitely.
I'd say probably the most common, it seems to be the hang on though.
Yep.
As far as probably versatility and getting into, a multitude of trees.
Yeah, that's a good point though. So like a climbing stand, you're going to have to think about cutting off limbs or whatever, or you're just looking for a straight tree. And I know that's what you've used with good success.
Yeah, I'd say fair. But yeah, I generally use a climbing stand, but also we live in an area, or I should say like where I hunted in Nebraska and Wisconsin, which I guess are the two states I predominantly hunted whitetails. We're blessed with a lot of trees that are conducive to using a climber. And even if I always carry a saw in my, like a handsaw in my cargo pocket.
Like our little cheap bone saw or
Exactly.
whatever in our 10-minute talk.
Yeah, pretty similar. I mean, Gerber makes one, Wicked Tree Gear makes one. I've used both of them. But we're lucky, generally only have to
straight trees.
They've got straight trees. You're trimming 2 or 3 branches.
Yeah.
But then I'll flip side that and say sometimes I can't get as high as I want because eventually you run into a bigger one and you're just like, nope, I guess this is as high as I go.
Exactly. And the reason that I started using a hang-on stand is because where I lived prior to Wisconsin in Iowa, everything is a gnarly white oak with branches that start at 8 feet, so you're not going to be able to get up there. And that's part of the difference there is you'll be able to work around that using like a system with portable climbing sticks, whereas you'd be, inchworming, picture that in your head, like inchworming up a tree in a climbing stand.
Right.
Whereas with portable climbing sticks, you can work around those branches and then tuck your hang on in between 2 limbs or something like that.
Well, and you're likely to be able to get into a tree that has more back cover.
Yeah.
That's another problem that I've run into is, being a little bit too exposed, and I've had deer spot me for sure.
Yep,
so.
definitely.
But there's pros and cons, though. It's a lightweight, super fast, easy, simple system.
Yep.
But
less moving parts.
But there's sacrifices with it as well. I was just thinking.
Which one is that? Where it's the lightweight, easy, but sacrifice? That's the climbing stand. Climber.
Whereas a lock on, you're bringing in sticks, you're bringing in a stand. They make super lightweight ones.
Sounds like a lot of stuff.
It is.
How much? What does somebody look like when they're going into this thing? They look like a.
So that's a great question because we were talking about that too. You got to think about how you're going to get this stuff in. A lot of Midwestern hunters, myself included, up until last year, look at these things like frame packs and they're like, oh man, that's only for the Western guys. I went to a frame pack last year. I'll never not take that thing whitetail hunting because I could take my entire tree stand, which is it's a lightweight, about 11-pound hang on. It's a Lone Wolf Alpha Assault with some muddy climbing sticks. That stand is 11 pounds. Each stick, and I bring 4 of them, are 3 pounds. So all in all, last year my pack was 37 pounds, and you're taking that in and out of the woods all the time. So if you don't have an effective way to transport that, you're not gonna want to go as far. You're gonna be more uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing about a frame pack is if you do kill something in one of those areas where you're a mile from the road, a lot of Midwestern hunters usually drag out their deer. And
they rarely bone it out.
Yeah, and Western guys have way more experience with boning it out and stuff like that. That, I think, is one of the similarities. I think that's an overlooked tactic here in the Midwest.
I always wondered if it was illegal in the Midwest or something.
Well, so it is in some states, which is super weird.
It is. So interesting.
Yeah.
I think I remember when I moved here because I was looking into that. because I was like, oh, if I kill a deer back in here, I'm just going to
Bone
cut
it
it
up.
up. And then it was like, oh no, for a while, I think you could cut them in half, Eric. And then that transitioned to, I think, 5 total pieces. I'm like, well, I've got 4 quarters, potentially a neck roast. Maybe I want to cut the rib cage out, and I've got back straps and tenders. I've got way more than 5 pieces here, guys.
Whoa.
You know,
what is it now?
I don't know.
So we're in Wisconsin, and last year there was a really weird, so part of hunting the Midwest is you're hunting CWD territory.
Right.
You can be.
Right.
Yeah, you can be. And here in Wisconsin, they had a law change last year that ended up not happening. They reversed the law change, but for a while everyone was kind of in a frenzy because the rule was you were going to have to quarter your deer and not let the spinal cord leave the county of harvest. And so obviously if you're pulling your deer out whole, your spinal cord is coming with. So a lot of guys were kind of up in arms because they're like, oh, how am I going to do this? I've never quartered a deer before. I always just take it to the processor. Opens up a whole nother learning curve for people. People don't like change. And the vocal majority there ended up getting that rule overturned. So now I believe we're right back to where you mentioned. I don't think I think you actually might be able to, we're going to have to hit up the Google machine.
Yeah,
let's hit up the
this
Google
one
machine
up
before we tell people what they can and can't do legally.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then also, this stuff changes year to year. You look at a rule that was almost I think it was actually in place essentially, and then all of a sudden became out of place just, really
within a week,
moments before the season.
Yep. Surprise.
This is a total rabbit trail, but I was a little bit with that. What I didn't know is let's say I don't plan on mounting the steer, but so then you've got the horns, which are connected to the brain, which are connected to the spine. So now I have to take that to a taxidermist in the county. I can't take, anyway, I don't know. That's a whole nother
topic. Yep.
Where were we? Oh, I know. I was going to say one thing when we were talking about tree stands, the different types of tree stands. So depending on what whitetail state you plan on hunting, look at what types of trees you're going to be in, because that'll help dictate what stand you need.
Definitely.
Okay. Yeah. Makes sense.
From a gear standpoint.
Okay, you were talking about the frame pack.
Yeah. So a frame pack, that was a big change that I made last year, and I feel like that has worked out extremely well. Then you also, if you live in the Midwest, you have a frame pack that you can take on your Western hunts. I used the same frame pack that I used whitetail hunting on a mule deer hunt out in Montana last fall. Yeah. So you get dual purpose stuff, which I think that same thing can also be said about apparel. The misconception might be that you're not walking very far, so you don't need to think about layering or layering system or anything like that.
And sometimes you aren't.
Sometimes you're not. Yeah, for sure. But when you are, you definitely want to have a layering system in place where maybe you have a lightweight puffy jacket. So, some kind of lightweight next to skin layer that's going to wick moisture and sweat as you get warm.
Non-breathable chest waders.
Yes. Yes.
If you're me.
No. No.
Just kidding.
Yep. So I really do think there's a lot of carrier crossover there in gear.
Well, and that's actually that's a really handy thing for a person making that west to east transition. Yeah. You don't really need another gear set, at least as far as apparel. In fact, that's what I wear 99.9% of the time. It's almost like I pack super layered with all of my Western hunting apparel, including waterproof gear in the event of inclement weather, which we often get during our deer season out here.
Yep.
And like you said, you may walk in light, but again, going to your backpack, you need a place to stuff all your extra clothes, because when you get there, you're probably going to have to bundle up and to the point where it'd be you'd be bundled up to your coldest day that you were anticipating hunting out west.
Oh, I've seen some people get bundled up out here in their tree stand. They look like a freaking Michelin man.
Yeah. Literally.
They're wearing
that's about how it.
They're wearing some serious stuff. A lot of people just go hunting in their snowmobiling.
Yeah.
Clothes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and then
around here,
almost even an extra layer to that, for lack of a better term, because it's a complete pun, would be once you get to your hunting spot, right? you're not going to be moving for a long time. So you're not going to have the luxury to stretch your legs if you're hunting from the ground, or maybe even go on like a 15-minute hike, or, I'm going to walk over here and I'm going to glass on the other side of this knob, get the blood moving. Like, you're probably going to be stopped for a while without the option to move. So you almost need to plan on dressing, or at least having the ability when you get there to dress a little bit warmer than you might.
Definitely.
Doing a quick switch from third to fourth gear here, or maybe fourth, third, whatever.
Classic, Jim.
I did myself have to acquire some new gear when the turkey hunting came up. I found like the whitetail hunting, it was the same stuff that I used out west.
Yep.
But then when turkey hunting came around, I had to get some different stuff. I had to get
What'd you get?
I had to get a face mask.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like a camo face mask. I just had to get more camo stuff.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that was purely based off of popular media selling me that I had to get more camo stuff when I'm hunting turkey, or if it actually is true because their eyesight's so good.
Man, I don't know. I
had to get. All I know is that my face was really exposed.
Face is
so I had
good
to
one.
cover, I had to cover that up, and then I got a couple of different pieces for camo.
Yeah. Probably some lightweight,
and
super
I also
lightweight
got some
stuff,
like Illimitic stuff,
which is a good thing
too,
to keep in mind in the spring.
Being in spring.
Yep. But yeah, I definitely think, and I'd be curious I would imagine that they would kind of replicate, because we've talked about this, but I think a lot of like the camo thing for turkeys is the hunting media selling us that camo. I wear camo myself too,
Right.
So it's not like I'm out there trying to buck the norm, but I definitely think with a solid colored brown, green, tan, whatever shirt and pants, but then as long as you got your face and hands covered up, I think you're going to be able to stay hidden from turkeys.
You could probably get away with a fair amount. I mean, I know, like,
Spoken
I generally
from two people who just have never tried it.
Well, I always
true.
wear solid pants, but you're always sitting when you're turkey hunting. So I figure, like, whether I'm wearing gray pants or brown pants, they just look like a log.
Yeah.
And the foliage is generally high enough that you're half buried in it anyway. I think it just depends on time of year with that, too. I mean, we're totally switching.
Yeah.
But, like, if there's a ton of foliage, if the trees have popped, like, probably less of a big deal. Early on in the season when there's nothing, you probably want a little bit extra to break up your outline.
And that's another good point there is, I don't care what you're wearing. If you got the sun at your back, you could be wearing a neon pink suit, and whatever the animal is that's coming in is not going to see you. Because think about the last time you drove home from work and you got the sun in your eyes. You can't tell the color of anything. All you see is crazy contrast. So you'll hear this a lot in the turkey woods, but I think it also really applies to whitetails when it comes to stand selection. But if you hear a bird gobble, you're going to want to set up and get the sun at your back so you're in the shadows. And when that bird is looking to find you, it's looking into a lot of crazy contrast. Same thing, I keep that in mind with like a morning stand location. I'm going to want the deer to be walking west of that stand so they are blinded by the east rising sun if they're looking up at me. And just flip that for an afternoon spot where I'm expecting deer, I'm going to want them east of me so they're looking up into the sun.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, too, does that also, when you mentioned crazy contrast, does that make you ever choose any kind of gear that has a little bit of a breakup action to it rather than making you look like a perfectly human-shaped silhouette, making you look a little bit more like a bush?
Yeah, I think ghillie suits are the best thing there. Like, and the other thing I think that's very telltale human is hats. If you're like walking around and you're trying to find someone on the ground, the first thing you're going to notice is the bill of their hat. So like if you are hunting on the ground, like if that's something that you're considering, just wear a beanie or like do something, have crazy long hair like Zach from the Hunting Public. We've talked about those guys a bunch, but if you watch some of the stuff that they do when they're using these ground hunting tactics, they're not wearing the traditional stuff that you would when you're hunting from a tree stand or whatever. They might switch it up a little bit.
But that's interesting to hear you say that, because I always really like wearing a ball cap because it gives me an opportunity to shield my eyes a little bit. Like I can just dip my head and then I feel like I'm covering part of my face and I'm not like revealing like my eyeballs, which I know I've had turkeys pick out my eyes before. I think that's like what little kids do
when, they just cover their eyes so you can't see them.
No. No.
Ostriches definitely do.
If I can't see you, you can't see me.
No, I mean that's actually a good point.
Mark,
I don't know.
I didn't mean to liken your strategy to.
Well, I feel like, have you ever felt like a turkey like saw your eyeballs and you're like,
Oh,
holy
yeah,
mac, we just made eye contact and now he's like,
I definitely looked down when we were hunting with the born and raised guys this year. We had hens from literally like they were within 5 feet of us.
oh, and it's just like,
Yeah, and
I'm not here.
there was a point where like I remember kind of like trying to look away, and I looked, and everyone was looking at the ground. No one was looking at those turkeys.
I looked them suckers right in the eye.
Yeah.
I want them to know.
Oh, God.
They know when they see me staring them down. They know.
you mean
they just don't
business.
They
move.
start shaking.
Yep. Yep. Dead in the eyes.
Yep.
Okay, back to gear.
Yes.
So we've discussed the idea of frame pack. We talked about the apparel a little bit. It does tend to cross over quite
Yeah,
well.
definitely.
What other kind of gears out there? So you've mentioned, I don't know if I'm steering the boat in the right direction. You guys are more pros than I am. But you've mentioned grunt call, rattlers.
Oh, yeah.
What's
Yeah,
what's
whitetails are
what
definitely
other-
very receptive to calling.
They are.
So for all you elk hunters out there, or at least archery elk hunters, here's another critter you can chase that you can call them in.
You can
Yeah.
talk to.
Definitely. And
Talk dirty to them.
Yep.
Yes.
And it's so like I always bring a grunt call. Yeah, I'm hearing some buzzing too. I don't know
That's
what
my
that
phone.
Oh,
was.
Mark, that's like the number one rule of podcasting.
It's on silent. It's not ringing.
It's buzzing. Do you know how to put your phone on Do Not Disturb?
What do you think, Jim?
Mark, no. Here, hold on. This is
Oh, don't just throw it in the corner.
no. Well, your phone is at 6% battery too, by the way. Let's just point that out. All right. There should be a way. I don't know how to swipe up. All right. You know what, Mark? We're doing your way. It's on 6%. It's gonna
See,
die
look,
soon
it's
anyway. Just put it in
fixed.
the pocket. Okay, we're
calling whitetails.
talking dirty to 'em.
Yep. I definitely think one thing you don't want to leave home without is a grunt call. That's something that it's super conversational. I think people would actually be surprised how frequent deer actually grunt. If you spend a lot of time with bucks, fairly in close proximity, regardless of the time of year, you're going to hear grunts, and it might not be like your stereotypical rut, like, like guttural roar almost, but you'll hear subtle grunts, and I think it's like a social thing that they do. Rattling, I think that's, I kind of think it's overused. I still bring rattling antlers just because I can't not bring them.
Right.
It's as soon as I don't bring it, I'm gonna wish I had them. And it's one extra thing. But I feel like I spend a ton of time in the whitetail woods. I've seen in like literally 20 years of being like deer hunting, I've seen maybe 3 buck fights.
Yeah.
So I think rattling might be something that gets overused. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, so personally, particularly for kind of like run and gun type setups where, or I'm generally not going in the same spot, whatever. I find rattling antlers, although probably valuable, I find them cumbersome and kind of a pain. Even if you got a backpack, they don't fit in your backpack.
And they're loud.
Great. They're loud.
Regardless
they
of what
can,
you have.
It's an extra thing to get in the tree. It's an extra thing to hang in the tree. I'm not saying at all don't bring them, because I think they are extremely valuable.
Yeah.
And I think if you can make it work, and I know some guys that have tons of success rattling bucks. In fact, that's like their go-to every year, right? But like you said, if I was going to pick something I wouldn't leave home without a grunt call, it's compact, it's easy to use, it's easy to master. You can pretty much, if you can blow into a straw, you can make a grunt call work. And I guess not a pro tip, because I'm not a pro at this, but what I do, they generally have a lanyard that you hang around your neck, and I actually tuck mine behind my bino harness.
Yeah.
So it keeps it always at the ready. It stays put. It's not swinging around. Heck, you can even use it hands-free. If you just slide it up a little bit, you can tip your head down into it.
That is a pro tip.
So that's my grunt call tip.
Yeah.
Mark the pro tipper.
Yep, exactly.
So
Another thing I think we'd want to talk about, not gear related, is situational tactics. You hear a lot of people tree stand is definitely going to be your primary method of hunting, but I also think there's something to be said if you are someone coming from out west and you want to deploy a mobile hunting strategy. I definitely think that there is a place for it, whether you're in a place where you can see or not. Like if you're in thick timber, I still think you can do on a windy day with wet leaves. I think there's I'd be curious to try this. I haven't myself. I've been in situations where we're tracking deer during those conditions. Like maybe someone hit one or whatever and you're following a blood trail. And it's crazy how many deer you'll sneak up on in that kind of scenario.
And I know like that's something that I've wanted to try more of, but you kind of get entrenched in your tactics and what worked the last time, and you're like, well, I'm pretty good at this.
Right.
And then I guess, other things also, sometimes these pieces aren't that big that we're hunting.
Yeah.
So you don't have a lot of room to move around.
Yep. Yeah. So as we come up on an hour here, I know we're going to go over an hour. So if you're listening now, stay buckled because we're going to keep you here for a bit longer. But I want to discuss, I feel the obligatory optics discussion should come up as far as gear goes. And after that, if I'm giving you a teaser within the episode, we would be remiss to not discuss deer drives.
Sure.
Yes.
So, but okay, let's talk optics here real quick first. Optics for this kind of a hunt versus your Western hunt. Somebody comes over, they're fully kitted out for a Western hunt, and they come over to the Midwest. Can they just use their gear as is, or are they going to need to get something new?
I'd say they're probably good to go.
Yeah.
I would tend to agree with you unless your rifle scope is pretty high mag.
Yeah.
Like a 6-24, I just think is too much.
Yeah,
if you're,
totally.
If
you're
rifle
almost
hunting,
never going to bring it above that 6.
I crank mine. I've put her at 16 a few times, but I've taken some. I think I killed a buck last year at 230, and the year before I killed one at 330.
Mark cranks it Boardman.
Yep.
But also
that doesn't sound good.
That would have
Mark
been totally sufficient with a 3-9 by 40. You
Mark
got to execute
big numbers
those shots.
Boardman. That's what I found about Mark. Mark loves himself a big old objective. He loves himself some big old magnification.
Within reason.
Big old scope tube, and you love yourself a big old 300 Wisdom.
Yes. I won't dispute that. A 4-16 is kind of like my max for Midwest.
Yes.
But here's what I like about that, and that's why I like about out west. And I've said this before.
Yep.
You want to shoot deer in a tree stand, you're good. You want to go shoot an elk at 600 yards, you're good.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
So.
Same goes for the 2.5 to 10 by 44.
I was gonna say that.
Which Mark does not like as much as the 4-16 because it's not as big.
Fair. Personal preference.
The 2.5 to 10 by 44 is the scope that I recommend to most people.
Oh, yeah.
Literally, if they just say, I'm going hunting, what do I need? 2.5
Viper
to 10 by
HS
44.
2.5 to 10.
Yes, a very common configuration over here in Wisconsin, of course, in the Midwest, is the old 3-9 by 40. It has been the standby for many, 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 many years.
Fun fact, there are literally, if you're applying to be on some states in the Midwest that are affected by chronic wasting disease have deer sniper teams.
Yes.
Part of the prerequisites to be on a deer sniper team is a minimum 3x9 by 40 rifle scope. Minimum. Yeah, man.
Minimum.
But when I grew up hunting in Washington, of course, I grew up hunting blacktail, so I guess some similarities as far as shot distances here. 3-9, that's what everybody had.
Yeah.
3-9 gets it done. Yeah.
Yeah.
And 3-9, 4-12, there's a reason those two are probably the most popular around here configurations. And a BDC reticle is pretty much all you need because you got to just have, cap turrets, set it and forget it at 100 yard zero.
Kentucky windage beyond that,
Kentucky windage beyond that. Binos. A set of 8x42s is what we tend to prefer, but Mark is going to immediately look at the face right there. He's already telling me 10x42s, man. They're going to be your option because you can use them around here. You can use them out west.
Okay.
10's just a nice power to have. I'm sorry. I'm putting.
So you are, but they're actually the exact words that were going to come out of my mouth. So. But yeah, you're right. If I was just going to hunt the Midwest, I'd be like, dude, 8x42 all day long.
Yep,
but just because that's what I have, and because it is so versatile, I generally use if I'm going to go archery elk hunt, I'm going to have a 10x42. If I'm going to hunt deer around here, I carry a 10x42.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'd agree.
Rangefinder is important to have.
Yes.
Yeah, rangefinder is always important to have. It's always important to have, especially though considering a rangefinder with angle compensation, which all of ours do when you're shooting out of a tree stand.
Yep.
That's not always something that people take into consideration, but it's very, very important.
And another thing is, so last year I had a Ranger 1300 that I was using.
Yeah.
And so I had an Impact 850 before that. Impact 850 is a great rangefinder, especially if you're trying to keep the cost low or your budget friendly option. That's it. but it has a black reticle. The impact has
It's not illuminated. Yeah.
Yes. So the Ranger has that illuminated red reticle. A lot of times your shots on a whitetail are going to be those waning hours on the front or back end of daylight. Being able to like get that super clear red, like it's yelling in your face, it's 36 yards, like that helps a lot.
Red reticle.
Yes.
Red reticle. What's that movie where it says
Red Rum?
Red Rum. What is that?
Well, it's murder spelled backwards.
Red Rum.
Oh, right. Oh, yeah.
Red Rum.
Every time I hear red reticle, I think
it's The Shining. The Shining.
Oh, that's what it
Yep.
is.
Yes.
So, okay, we've discussed optics, I think, quite well.
Discussed
That's
murder.
pretty much all you need.
Yep.
Yep. Should we talk about deer drives?
Oh, yeah.
You know what? Let me go real quick
All right,
into something else. And it goes back to like the mindset, and I talk to a lot of I'll go back and I maybe have talked to this experience before, but the first time I hunted deer out of a tree stand, I was like, man, I'm used to being on the ground, being able to move. Like I'd seen what I'd seen on television.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is this even going to be fun? And it is fun. So I'm going to throw that out there.
All right. No, that's a good thing. That's a good thing to point out.
Yep.
For some reason, it gets the idea that it isn't fun.
Right.
Like that it is an obligatory killing once a year. Like, fall, everybody just robotically gets up out of their seat, puts their camo on, walks to a tree stand, kills something, walks back, and then they suddenly wake up from blackout, and then, okay, that was hunting season. I guess that's over. We'll just wait to the next one.
Yes.
Right. But I mean, I was even talking like, so there's that, and then there's also fun from the like, man, I'm going to be in one spot forever.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it's pretty cool. And golly, I'm not saying this. So mindset, let me go back to this because I'm going to draw a correlation here between maybe MC Ryan can just like kind of blank out my blank thought there.
No, keep it in MC Ryan. Just
but I'll talk to you later. But people often that I talk to out west are like, oh man, I can't sit for that long. Like I don't want to be in one spot for that long. And I guess my argument is like, so what do you think a glassing knob is where you post up for half the day or all day? Like it's basically a tree stand on the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, you're a little more freedom. You could probably stretch your legs a little bit, but oftentimes you're sitting in one spot for a half a day, sometimes an entire day. Sometimes, depending on the hunt, you could be in the same spot for multiple days.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there.
True.
Yeah.
No, it's a good thing to bring up, Mark.
Definitely. I mean, when we were bear hunting in Idaho, we literally sat on a glassing knob all day.
All day.
And that, like...
We put our chips into that spot that day.
You're sitting at one spot all day waiting for something to walk out.
Yep.
What's the difference? There isn't one.
Right. Deer drives.
Yeah.
I know you want to hit those.
Well, I want to hit it because you can't talk about Midwestern whitetail hunting without and even if it's not something
Can you imagine an elk drive?
Even if it's not something that you decide that you are going to do, there will be a time where people are either talking about doing it or you run into a deer drive going on and you're wondering what the heck is going on here.
Yeah.
What are they talking about? And Erik, explain it. Explain what this is for somebody who's coming from out west.
So your quintessential deer drive involves a group of pushers who are people that are walking through cover where deer are suspected to be hanging out, and another team of posters who are hanging out on the suspected exit trails.
Yeah, now let's just re-emphasize that word. It is posters.
Yes.
There's no CH in there.
Yes, exactly. Minus the CH plus the ST.
Yeah.
So
anyway, I just want to make that very clear in case somebody misheard that. Posters.
Yes.
Like the thing you hang on your wall.
Yep. So
Mark, I'm trying to make sure people don't think we're saying poachers.
Oh God, the spelling. Got
it. So the pushers will walk through the area. They'll be, blowing their scent through there. They'll be disrupting the area.
They're trying to bump deer.
They're trying to bump deer. And, a lot of times that leads to deer boogieing out of those bedding areas pretty quick, and they're hitting the most convenient exit trails, and that's where you're going to have your other people like kind of standing by waiting for to shoot those deer escaping their bedding location.
Yep.
Lots of stuff to keep in mind there with safety. You don't want to be shooting a well-orchestrated drive. People think about like a deer drive and they think like, you know, the clampets are now just running the swamp down off of whatever country road.
Oh yeah,
A well
everybody's
executed,
getting shot at. People
Yeah.
are just narrowly missing bullets.
which
I mean, it definitely gets.
definitely happens.
Yeah. Not all of them are the stereotypical or what you might be thinking
Right.
of hillbilly sling fest.
Yeah, because a well executed deer drive like really is a work of art. I mean,
That's a great tactic around here.
and it works very well. And there's other ways to do it that are less aggressive than a deer drive. Like we've had the wind bump discussion, which is essentially a deer drive on a more conservative scale, where you're rather than like physically walking through the bedding area, you're
Clanging
walking
pots
on
and pans and all that.
Yeah, rather than doing that, you're walking on the upwind side, letting your scent drift into it, and then the deer naturally like slowly walk out.
Yeah, they smell something, they just want to check it out,
Right.
rather than, oh my gosh,
Holy crap, they're here. Get out.
it's alien versus predator. I'm
Yes.
getting abducted.
They've been essentially bothered versus like stepped on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which
Like-
literally you can almost step on deer. I mean,
Oh yeah, because
yeah.
that's something that happens. We discussed that too, where sometimes actually a rather smart deer will
Oh, yeah.
understand what's happening and it will stay put, even though absolute chaos is encroaching on it.
Yep.
It will stay put, and people will literally walk by within feet of deer,
Yeah.
laying
is
right
pretty
next to
crazy.
them
Yep.
in some thick stuff, and occasionally step on deer.
Yeah.
And then at that point, the deer's out of there.
Yeah,
Usually, I would
gone
say, unless
fast.
it's dead or
Yep.
it has CWD. But
So I'm gonna throw this out there because we've thrown out, like I hear Ryan talk about, a deer drive, and we kind of throw out kind of like this classic to me, which is an exaggeration of like banging pots and pans. Like, have you ever like actually? Because I'll say this: I've never personally encountered that or I've participated in deer drives, but they've never been
that.
like that. Like I'd say they're either kind of like the wind bump type thing, or
Yep.
small scale deer drives, or even more aggressive ones, but still like not like all out pots and pans.
Right.
I think it happens.
It definitely happens, but there's just so many other ways to do it too. Like, and you don't need a huge team of people to execute a deer drive. When my dad and I used to hunt together up in northern Wisconsin, we didn't even, I forget what we called them, but we would literally like just leapfrog each other. Like we would start out, someone would make a big loop. It might take them 45 minutes to an hour to get from like that person's 6 o'clock location working around counterclockwise or clockwise to their 12 o'clock location. And then we'd sit there, we'd wait an hour, and then like if my dad just did that, I would do the exact opposite, and I would go the opposite of him and get to his 12 o'clock location.
And of course,
Did you guys kill
like
some
you
deer
said-
doing that?
We did, yeah.
And like you
Yep.
said too, I mean, safety is obviously critical, so you got to really think these things out. And communication between
Yep.
people is profoundly important, because obviously you don't want to be pointing a gun. Because when if a deer pops out, it can be very exciting, and sometimes hopefully you're thinking about it, but
Right.
people can make mistakes.
Don't get tunnel vision.
Yeah.
So that's pretty
Well,
important.
orchestrate the drive so nothing bad is going to happen, so a
Yes.
person
Right.
isn't going to be in the line of
Yeah,
fire, but also, and have that communication, but obviously at times communication breaks down or plans change or somebody misunderstands. So yeah, don't get tunnel vision. Be
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah.
Yep.
And a lot of times too, on a drive, people think that they're pushing deer in the direction they're walking,
Right.
but a lot of times deer squirt out the back.
Definitely. So yeah, that's an awesome point, because someone might be thinking that, oh man, I get to post I'm a poster on this drive, and then someone on the other hand might think, I drew the short straw. I'm watching the exit tree. I'm watching where these guys just walked. There's no way. A lot of times, I think that's where deer are gonna escape.
Sometimes people will, even if you're hunting and you're not part of a drive, but you hear the, hey,
Yep.
you hear people kind of giving that off. They'll go and they'll sit up behind them.
Oh,
and
yeah.
just let a deer squirt out the back of that drive. and then-
100%. Yep.
I also wonder, we talk about these deer that stay put, that hang tight, that probably are getting walked by.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're just walking out the back door.
Yeah.
You get 50, 100 yards ahead of them, and they just, not even running, just
Right.
slipping.
Yep. Or if they even leave.
Yeah, maybe they don't even leave.
Yeah.
distinct
I don't know because I
possibility.
didn't see them.
Yeah.
Who knows? Great point.
Yep.
What do you think? Did we explain pretty much. I don't even
think
say did we
so.
explain everything, but at least
Some
is that
stuff.
a pretty good gist?
Yeah, I'd say it's a pretty good gist. You need a spot. You need some specialty gear, but a lot of your hunting gear doubles up.
Yep. And it's not what you're seeing on TV. That's the big thing that I think we got to get across. You see people naming their deer all the time, like on TV and all that.
Nothing wrong with it.
Nothing wrong with that, but like
Actually, I was watching the Drurys on TV
yeah.
the other day, and actually some awesome deer information. I don't get to hunt exactly the way they do,
But it's good intel.
Some good info, yeah,
For sure. And, and there's a fine line between the tactics that you might see on TV between what's like portrayed on your average public land DIY deer hunt, but there's always going to be tactics that you can pull from some of these resources that you can find out there to deploy on these things, you
Mark,
know?
I was giving you a funny look because never to be contrarian. Mark Boardman.
Am I contrary? Am I contrary?
No, never to be.
Oh,
Mark was like, well, you're not, it's not everybody names deer out here. And not that there's anything wrong with it,
Right.
but you're not wrong.
Well, I don't
You're
think
not
there
wrong.
is.
I that's the reason I was giving you a funny look. You were looking over at me like you just said.
thought I
Naughty
yeah,
word.
said something about your sister or something.
Yeah, no, all is good there. But to your point, Eric, it's not always like what you see on TV.
Yeah.
And I think there's stuff you can pull from, like, there's a lot of, food and, food plots, this, that, the other. Like, if you're hunting public, you're not going to have a food plot, right?
Right.
But, and I feel like one thing that gets touted from the rooftops, and us included, me included, like so don't take this, I am 1,000 a proponent of public land.
Yeah.
Celebrate it, hunt it, I use it, we need to keep it, we need to make more of it. However, private land boundaries is the reality, and I use my knowledge of public and private boundaries, and that does become part of my hunting strategy, including agriculture that's, taking place on private land. So I might be able to get into a spot that is public, but I know there's a private boundary on the backside that might have some ag, and then I can develop a hunting strategy around that.
That's very
Yeah.
true.
So I'd say private land is important too. And actually, I've hunted a lot of private land, and that's fun too. So.
Right. Exactly. It's all about what you can get access to and what you can. Like, I honestly would put a private land on permission hunt in the same bucket that I'd put a public land hunt.
Yeah.
Because you got permission. Who's to say that 6 other people that knocked on the door don't also have permission? Unless you own it, you don't control anything.
Yep.
That would be my thoughts.
And even if you own it, there ain't no guarantees.
Yeah. Yep.
I think you guys all just did some great last calls. My
I
last
think so,
call
too.
is going to be when you're here, also check out the small game hunting
Yeah.
because I think that is a phenomenal.
Yep.
Squirrels, rabbits,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the waterfowl. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think there's lots of stuff to hunt it.
Yep.
Lots of stuff to hunt it. Yep. Got it. If you have any other questions about this transition, hit us up.
Yeah, if we didn't cover something.
Yeah.
I think we're always thinking in reverse of this.
Yeah, so now I actually had to. Yeah, I think maybe maybe there's a part 2 that we need to do.
I think,
but we can only do it with your feedback. So
Yes.
let's end it at that. And happy hunting and shooting out there, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
See ya. Bye.
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 All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.